Oops.
Oh, let's all strategize that.
Yeah.
Do we compose ourselves?
Our live stream sitting position.
The mic is already on.
That's what I figured.
It's all right.
It's hot. We're ready.
All right.
All right. Testing. Everyone can hear me? Yeah. Cool. Also, we made it to the final session, so let's take a deep breath together before we start. Or clap. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm up here with the wonderful folks who brought to life the Chicago Resilient Communities pilot and Creatives Rebuild New York, namely the Guaranteed Income for Artists program. And we are at the Prioritizing Equity and Care at Scale panel. My name is Naja Gordon. I'm one of the program managers for the Guaranteed Income for Artists program. And to offer a brief visual description of myself, I am a small brown woman wearing a navy sweater, a white tank top, a blue pleated polka dotted skirt, and pink shoes. I'm up here with Mara Cuffey-Peterson, who is the Director of Strategic Initiatives for the Guaranteed Income for Artists program at Creatives Rebuild New York. Nancy Tsao. Who's the Director of Social Services Policy at the City of Chicago Mayor's Office. Mark L. Sanders II, who is the Deputy Commissioner for the Chicago Department of Family Support Services and leads the Human and Workforce Services divisions for the department. And Sarah Moran, who is the Director of Give Directly US. And Give Directly is the world's largest nonprofit dedicated to unconditional cash. Let's have a round of applause for our lovely people. Today we're going to hear from them some key takeaways, lessons learned, and insights for building the road to a national policy. So to get us started, we'll do a quick visual description from everyone.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think I'm also the first to say some stuff. So hi again, everyone. Mara Cuffey-Peterson. And for those behind the live stream, so pumped that you're still here after another long day. I'm a mixed Black woman. My hair is pulled back. I have a mean middle part today. Not as mean as yesterday, and I'm wearing a shiny blue. It's not pajamas, I promise. It's a really nice silk blue dress, and some gold hoop earrings.
Hi, I'm Nancy Tsao with the City of Chicago Mayor's Office. Visual description, I'm female with long hair and East Asian features, and I'm wearing after much deliberation this morning, a purple blazer, black pants and white shoes.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark L. Sanders II, Deputy Commissioner of Workforce and Human Services with the Chicago Department of Family and Support Services. I am a beautiful Black man wearing a beautiful blue suit,
Yes.
black shoes, and a gift from my brother on my left wrist, red, yellow, green, and black bracelet.
Yes. And I'm Sarah Moran, Give Directly. I am a white female. I have short blondish hair that doesn't really ever do what I want it to, and when I get nervous, my part will move from the left side to the right side, so that'll happen about 5 or 6 times during this panel. I'm wearing almost a Carolina blue jacket, jeans, and white shoes.
Did you say Carolina blue?
It's almost Carolina. Someone from Carolina is going to be mad that I said that. It is almost Carolina blue.
I love it.
Oh, no.
I love that.
All right, thank you all. To get us started, we'll offer a brief snapshot of each program.
Yeah, so I'll kick us off. So we're going to start with the, let's see if I do this correctly. Is it up there?
Yes.
Yeah.
The wrong one, though. There we go. This is the right one. So just to kick us off, we're in conversation today because both of these programs operate at a really large scale, right? We're all touching, servicing, providing support, providing care, we hope, as well as cash for thousands of people across the scale of a city, and in our case, in New York, across the geography of an entire state. And part of why we wanted to have this conversation is because ensuring that the verb part, the action part that is equity, the action part that is care, can indeed, we hope, be part of what that federal permanent, right, the big thing that we're working for. If we want those values to be up front and center, we have to learn from those of us. I want to learn from you all, right, about how you do this for 5,000 people. How do you provide care and support, and how do you do that across statewide itself as well? So just some more context. I know that you've all heard from me a couple of times over the last day and a half, but I haven't had a chance to talk more about Creatives Rebuild New York, our organization. So I wanted to spend just a minute talking about that. We're a 3-year, $125 million philanthropic initiative. Read into that yes, we're temporary, and yes, we're catalytic, we hope, and yes, we intend to have really high impact. We exist because, as we all know, ish was messed up for artists for a long time, right? The way money moves has not been right, especially for those of us who are artists who are Black, who are queer, who are disabled, who are transgender, who are gender nonconforming. Stuff is not right. A lot of people would tell you that the pandemic revealed that. I would say that the pandemic made it clear to people who weren't paying attention that things were not right. I just want to also emphasize that artists face the same kinds of precarity that all kinds of gig workers, which we know is right, a lot of folks experience, wage theft, inconsistent money flow, huge levels of uncertainty. And so CRNY exists because some good people were paying attention and said, this is the time to do something really big. And the time to do something big at this scale that is about supporting the livelihoods of artists. And so I want to highlight that we're here to talk about our Guaranteed Income for Artists program, and just to lift up that we're also running simultaneously an artist employment program that supports 300 artists in collaboration with community-based organizations, again, all across the state. Think in the lineage of a WPA or a CETA, the Comprehensive Employment Training Act. Think in those sort of policy landscapes, et cetera. Not to mention, we do all sorts of other stuff too. We're busy, we're excited, we love stuff, because we have a short amount of time, so we have to get a lot done, it's important. So snapshot, 2,400 artists. Yes, we're talking statewide, not just New York City. Also, yes, artists really do live everywhere, not just in cities. They also live in rural places. They also live in indigenous nations, right? They also live in tribal lands. They live everywhere. And our program is $1,000 a month for 18 consecutive months. We're not the only program that supports artists. Shout out to Springboard for the Arts, who's here. If you haven't had a chance to check out their work in the hallway before you leave, please do. In Minnesota, there's a San Francisco program that supports artists. Ireland, the entire nation has a program that supports artists. There's stuff going on in Tennessee. So we're grateful to be in conversation with those folks. We partner with Steady App as well as community financial resources to move the money. We chose not to do an RCT because we believe in other methodologies for research. We're partnering with the University of Indiana and a bunch of other folks to make sense of all of the stuff that we're learning, et cetera. We think about, if we want to talk about goals, outcomes is all of you, we've all done theory of change stuff. We have all done those like 1,005-page documents to try to make sense. So I just wanted to pull out 2 of the many things in that document for us that feel relevant to our conversation today. But we hope this program will do. The goal we had in mind in designing it and implementing it is, again, that the lives and livelihoods of individual artists in New York State have been improved, right? Not wildly different than I think some of this program's goals and others. We're talking about financial stability, well-being, time, space, and energy to engage in artistic practice. I loved, if y'all were at the midday plenary yesterday, Shafika from Economic Security Project was talking about cash, what can cash do besides pay rent and bills? Rent and bills are important, more than important. We really gotta be able to do that. And what are the other things? And I think our program is one light on what are some of those other things, right? What is the freedom principle that we can ascribe to this kind of a program? What happens when cash becomes more? The second goal that feels really important to lift up here is that artists are better supported and understood, right, in labor and social safety net policies. We want artists to be allies and advocates in this work, right? We want to make sure they're also included in the things that we're going to be building in the future. That's part of why we were so intent on building community with y'all in this space, because we want to make sure that you know that artists are in your programs too, even if you haven't thought about it in that way yet. A little more detail, this program the eligibility is like the hardest thing, the thing that needs to be the simplest and the hardest thing to identify. So hopefully these couple of bullet points look simple, and I think for those of you who run programs yourselves will know that the word income, the word financial need, the word residence, the word household take hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours to drill down to understand really what you mean by those. We might get into that later. So for us, we use the self-sufficiency standard to account for financial need. We talked about New York State, not New York City, and of course be an artist, culture bearer, or culture maker. Like many other pilots, we wanted to make sure that our selection was randomized, and it was. Because we're entirely funded by philanthropic foundations, we were able to set the terms of our own prioritization. And so we were able to say, you know what, we really, really, really care about Black, Indigenous folks of color. We care about deaf, disabled folks. We care about the queer community, caregivers, immigrants, those who have criminal legal system involvement, those in rural places. We know artists show up in these categories. We want to prioritize them to make sure they show up in this selection. Just to also emphasize a lot of people who've applied to our program. We had 22,000 people apply for 2,400 spots, 22,000 people. Our application period was open for 6 weeks, which is a bit longer than some other pilots tend to operate, because we really wanted to reach all corners of New York State, and it's a really big place, in case, it's a really big place. It takes several hours to get from one place of New York to the other. Anyway, I left that up also because most arts funding, I think a lot of folks who applied to this program assumed that it was another grant. And so the concept of it being not that they were selected not because of the merit of their artwork, but just simply because they were deserving was completely new, completely new. And an entire, what did I write there? A huge departure from how arts-based funding operates. Just to lift up here, once we moved through that entire process, applications open, the whole shebang, we put together some more, we understood more about who was in our program, right? So I have several other thanks to my colleagues who are in the room who put together these graphics for me. But this one, I just wanted to give you all a sense of who's in our program, right? So here you can see, right, 41% of folks in our program are susceptible to, like a medical emergency. That's huge. We talk about disability justice, right? 56% of folks weren't sure when they would make income again, which is a lot. Quickly, I want to also share, I'm running out of time. I'm going to skip over this one and go on to the next because I have a really good quote later. Couple more bits. Both of us, we're going to talk about 3 key aspects of our programs: how how an advisory group functioned, what was a version of an advisory group in both pilots. We're also each going to talk about outreach, what that meant, and what methodologies we employed. And we're also going to talk about the application itself and what human-centered approaches we attempted and how it shook out. So I'll start. My version, the CRNY version of an advisory group, was a think tank. We held, and what is a think tank? It's a lot of Zoom meetings is what it is. That's what a think tank is. And 11, I don't think 11 is accurate. I think it felt like 100, even though it was 11. I think our think tankers might say that it felt like 100. And over the course of 3 months, we figured out how to do it. Right? And the people who are in our think tank, I would say we applied a FUBU principle, for us, by us. So there were artists in all corners of the state, right? Artists of multiple disciplines, people who are dancers, people who do interdisciplinary work, people who make films, people who are arts educators, who are teaching our children, right, how to become and be creative and apply their creativity to other parts of their life. We also had policy experts, right? We also had researchers. We also had activists in the workforce development space as well as in the GI and GBI space. And we came together to decide if we're going to do this, what need to be our guiding principles, right? How eligibility is, I think Sarah, you said this the other day on a call, which really resonated with me. Designing eligibility is also designing exclusion. And it's a pain point, right, in our process, because you have to set a boundary somewhere if you have a certain amount of dollars, right, and a certain amount of time to do what you're doing. Figuring out what the application should look like. What do we ask now? What do we ask later? We had 28 people And another key moment is that it was the same group of people over this time. So we're really building relationships with these folks, also in the hope that they would become allies and advocates for the work in the future. We worked with process facilitators. Maybe I didn't say that, maybe you all guessed, but I really care about facilitation. That's my thing, it's important. Because we're also operating this artist employment program, we're also thinking about the state of work. So we worked with the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, who are in the solidarity economy space and who are tremendous process facilitators. Some big wins, I would say building advocates out of, right? And because they wanted to be our amazing think tank. And the challenge, which I described in brief, just the reality that eligibility and randomization is a process of determining exclusion. We don't have a ton of data around how artists lead their lives. And so because to meet our goal that artists' lives and livelihoods, right, our goal that artists would be included in policies, we knew we needed to cast a wide net, and that made it such that our eligibility had to be wide and narrow, but not narrow and wide. You know, you get the complications there. Outreach. Look at this beautiful map. Artists really are everywhere. Do you see this? It's brilliant. I would say 3 main strategies to get to that over 22,000 people applying that are maybe a bit different than I've understood other programs to work. We do the info sessions. Everybody does the info sessions. You got to do like 1 million of them a week, and you just got to do them, and you partner with amazing people who already have connections in those communities in the hope that they will relay the message of how important this work is and that it's worth spending the 5-10 minutes filling out the application online. We also had a help desk where we worked with partners to literally have the phones, be on the phones. And those phones were open live assistance for a 6-week period, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day for 6 weeks. And when I tell you the phones, we broke the phones the first couple of days, and then we figured that out later. And then I left the outreach core as the first bullet point, but I left that for last because I think it's the most interesting. Again, in commitment with our value system, artists are amazing. So what if we hired artists to do the very work that we know they do best? So we hired a team of 10 artist organizers who live in all of the regions across, there's like 10 regional economic development centers in New York State, it's a whole thing, and said, what do you need? What do you think your community of artists would need to know about this program? What questions would they have? What would you do to bring them in? And then paid them, right? Paid them to do it, and then gave them a little extra cash to be able to use the methods that they wanted to employ, which included things like host a party, right? Host a potluck, build a bunch of new content on TikTok, hold poster. We had these beautiful posters that were all available and all over the state. So some cool stuff. We really prioritized language and disability justice because New York State is a really big place, of course, and that meant hiring a disability justice consultant, hiring a language justice consultant, so that we could do things like, is this platform, is this application both on the mobile phone and on the computer going to be visible to screen readers for people with low vision access and different types of screen readers, just to give you a sense of what a disability justice consultant can do at this stage of a program. And then finally, the application process. Here's a thing. The application is more than just the application. There's like a lot of other processes involved that I don't think we talk about as frequently because they're super unfun. Although, and everyone does them a bit differently depending on the kind of partnerships that you have in place before you implement the program, as well as the population that you're serving. So that being said, this funky graphic is one of the 4 or 5 huge flow charts that we made in partnership to figure out what happens from step 1 to step 72. And hopefully it's the 72nd step for me, Mara, but only the 3rd step for the artist or the person who's applying to the program. So you have to move through verification of some kind. In our program, that was really challenging for a number of reasons. We absolutely wanted to do and did make benefits counseling available to everyone. And then you get to do the fun part. Okay, it's time to get paid. Or do you want to get paid? Please say yes, enroll, and then move to the actual onboarding Like I said, we worked with both Steady Up as well as Community Financial Resources, and so at every step of these 5 workflows, there were choices along the way, so artists could really decide what was best for them. And then once we got to that, yes, I'm ready to be and I want to be in this program moment, it was a really short time turnaround for that first payment to happen, which we're very proud of course, not without challenges. I'd say the way that CARE showed up in this process was a lot of phone calls. I think we underestimated the capacity required to really support people in the way that we wanted to. And I think that we did.
We did.
What it meant was I still get text messages every day from lots of people about what's happening next. Sometimes now I get really fun little emojis and and stories about how people's lives are changing because of this cash. But at this time, when we're getting a lot of emails and we're moving through processes, some of those text messages were a little less fun and a little less smiley. And I think our role, and I don't say that to be facetious, but it's important, that feedback is really important for us to hear as a movement so that we can do better, do differently, and really provide that care. It means if you get 700 emails in a day, you have to figure out how to answer them in that day. I want to close with a quote. Just to give you, again, we're talking about real people, real people in this work, real people in this program. When we're talking about artists, this is a beautiful dancer talk. If you've watched any R&B video ever in the 90s, it might have been this wonderful person's choreography. And so I want to share something that a different artist actually, but also a dancer shared with us. Since beginning to receive payments, my artistic practice has been affected in a million ways, the most significant of which perhaps is room to breathe. Some months are lucrative and others are not. Scrambling at the end of the month to make rent because a gig's check hasn't come in the mail yet has become my reality. I didn't realize how stressful that was until I received this funding. The relief isn't just financial, it's emotional, physical, mental, and artistic. A little bit about our program.
Thank you, Mara.
Thank you, Mara. And I have to say, in the past few weeks preparing for this talk and seeing some of the slides, there was just so many bells of recognition and memories resurfacing from last year. And you know, even though I have the pleasure with Mark to represent our pilot and with Sarah to represent our pilot, it really was the work of so many people, not only directly in the Chicago program, but of folks in this room that came before us. You know, if you did it for 100 people, for 30 people, and just really appreciative of the opportunity to share a little bit of what we learned, and also, you know, come find us after, because we only get through this together by sharing. So appreciative to have that opportunity. So also wanted to transition into ours with a quote from one of our participants that also agreed to participate in our media cohort. And so Zenaida, pictured here in what is possibly the most awesome t-shirt I've ever seen, is a mother of 3 that's living in the south side of Chicago. And when we talked to her close to the start of the program, she was telling us about how, you know, to provide for her family, she was working a full-time retail job, right? Overnight shifts, multiple nights a week. And on top of that, working a second job, a couple shifts a week. And through that work, you know, was able to provide for her family, right? Was able to pay her rent, pay a lot of the basic necessities, but that was kind of it. And because she was so successful with working hard and doing what she needed to do, she also was not eligible for a lot of our public benefits programs. And, you know, to us, I think she just represents, you know, so many Chicagoans and so many of us in the U.S. who are often working overtime to stretch these thin resources and, you know, represent the kind of space that we want to give and allow that grace and that space to breathe through this guaranteed income. And so we talked to her, I think, after she had gotten her first check, and so asked, you know, what was that like? What was that experience? And she noted that, you know, in that first month, a huge burden was already lifted. It's a lot to have that hanging over your head when you're trying to raise a family. This puts me so much further ahead already. And she told us that some of her goals included catching up on utility bills, paying off some past debts, and doing some work on her credit. Is this readable? Yes, okay. So a little bit, some of this will sound very familiar, I think, just to the design and the best practices that have been set out through the community, and also if you were in the prior session with Cook County. So we do feel very proud to have administered one of the largest guaranteed income pilots in the country at 5,000 households served. And you know, it didn't happen overnight, right? There had been prior interest in the city. There had been prior pilots at smaller scales, both privately funded and also maybe not billed as guaranteed income. But we had not previously maybe had that level of political support and funding, frankly, to run something at scale. And like many others, the pandemic and in particular the federal response to give that more flexible grant funding for cities to really try things opened that door for us to fund this pilot. So in total, we set aside $31.5 million. 30 million of that was the direct payments, and 1.5 was for the administrative costs. So through our pilot, it was $500 a month for 5,000 households. We actually ended up enrolling, I think, 5,006.
Yep. Sarah knows that number.
We had a little extra slack, so we tried to pass it on. And the participants were selected through a citywide application process with a selection, with a lottery selection. And like many others have spoken to, you know, we didn't know exactly what to expect with applications, but we saw a huge demand. And in just 3 weeks, it was 176,000 applications. I think about 90,000 of those came in the first day. So, you know, there had been a lot of media coverage. We were lining up. We were all feeling pretty anxious, I think, at 8 a.m. that Monday, and the numbers just started ticking up right away. And
We broke T-Mobile.
We broke T-Mobile. You said you broke the phone lines. We broke T-Mobile.
Yep.
And households, we tried to keep it simple. They had to be a Chicago resident, 18 years or older. We also, because of those Treasury funds, we could go up to 300% of the federal poverty line, but we went to 250, and that translates to just under 34,000 for a one-person household, 57,000 for a family of 3. And because we were, I think, a little earlier in the process, we also we weren't fully sure of how we could adhere to federal funding guidelines, and so we also included this component around attestation, around economic hardship that you may have experienced from COVID-19. We accepted and awarded one individual per household, and like Maura alluded to, a lot of discussion was put into our definition of household, and for us that was really defining essentially a family unit, yourself, your spouse, and any other family members who depend on you for most of your expenses. And we made sure to address some different scenarios. You know, what if I have a college student living with me? What if we have 2 families living under one roof? We did count those as separate households, so a lot of thought into that. In terms of where we are now, honestly, it was like scaling a cliff to go from budget has been passed, approved, moved to our Department of Family and Support Services, and you have to launch in April. So in 4 months, we went the city from this concept to having completed the contracting process, found amazing partners, ran through a lot of very difficult design decisions, and got that application out the door and ready, thanks to the strength of our partners, ready to intake 176,000 applications. And where we are now is that at the end of May, actually, just about 3,600 already received their 12th and final payment. So we are really coming to the end of the payments portion of our pilot. However, we are, as you may have heard alluded to this morning, thinking about what's next in terms of the longer term for the city, and also continuing to work in collaboration with our research partners at the UChicago Inclusive Economy Lab on the evaluation and eagerly awaiting those results. So I wanted to touch a little bit similarly on some of the goals and principles, because even in 4 simple criteria, there were so many embedded choices in each one of those decisions. And those are really tough, to decide how much, who's eligible, who gets to participate, how are we going to choose them, and how are we going to communicate that. And for us, I think that scale was really at the forefront of our minds. 5,000 was so exciting, and it was really daunting because we really feel like we were there first and had to, hopefully open up the path, but also knew that, we had this opportunity to not only demonstrate and share successes, but also any flops we make are going to be eagerly covered, right? And so that had some level of, I think, some pressure to try and do it as thoughtfully as possible without deliberating endlessly and just not getting the cash into people's hands. And so I thought of this little parallel earlier where just even though scale was central to so many of our decisions, as many of you probably are feeling, big or small, you end up having to make a lot of the same choices, right, in terms of your pilot. And I was thinking about my backyard COVID family-only wedding and then the reception 1 year later, but ultimately it's cake, outfit, guest list, all those things, you still have to do all of that labor. And so, we had to make sure that we were grounded, right, in terms of what were our goals, what were we really setting out to achieve, what were our principles, so we can navigate different trade-offs and different perspectives. And so we laid these out in partnership with our advisory group early on. We embedded them into our procurement, into our RFP, and shared them with our kickoff, with our implementation teams. And these were really the goals and principles that we came back to again and again, as we got more and more sort of specific with the decisions that we had to make throughout. And just a couple of examples about that, the income threshold, for example, really had us deep in conversation about whose well-being, which residents' well-being, right? And should we go narrower in trying to reach some of our most vulnerable populations and focusing the dollars that way? Or should we really go broader and use this as an opportunity to serve those households like Zenaida, who often get left out, because they're on this side of the safety net. And for us, we ultimately decided on broader eligibility in part because of our scale. We felt like we had an opportunity to try and validate what so many of the pilots before us were showing, and to kind of try and stamp that, no, that wasn't just one instance for 100 households. Here's what we really see at large scale. I'll keep going because I want to be mindful of time as well. So with our advisory group, mentioned that it really was such a village effort. So in our advisory group, we had about 37 members, and that included some city leadership from different departments and sister agencies, as well as community partners, both those that serve specific populations or who may be more issue-oriented. We had, policy experts, researchers, advocates, and some folks with lived experience as well participating. And we ended up meeting about 8 times prior to launch. And really the most, in addition to the advisory group, we had these absolutely critical partners. So a couple I'll name pre-implementation was the Harvard Government Performance Lab, who also supported the Chelsea Eats pilot. Were there to help us think through some of those difficult decisions that another prior pilot had faced before. They provided technical assistance. And our research partners, we really wanted to make sure it wasn't just bringing them in after, but really having that thoughtful co-design up front. And they helped us work through a lot of the data we needed to underlie our decisions. And then ultimately, you know, again, we had to put a certain level of detail to get our partners on board, but then we're so, so grateful to have the strong partners that we did, and Give Directly, AidKit, YWCA, and the hundreds of community organizations that helped us reach out. I'll just try to keep it brief. So just with a win, I think that the challenge was that there are so many valid viewpoints on these different choices, and because we, you know, even at 30 million, it's just not enough to serve everyone who, you know, is deserving. We're all deserving, right? And so that was challenging to navigate as well in our Zoom sessions, and some of them got a little more heated. That being said, we kept that space, right? And so I really think it was a win that we made those decisions in the open with these community partners, and they could understand some of those trade-offs that we were facing, and it wasn't like government making shadowy decisions, you know, off to the side, or whoever has access. And so that's a space that was really impactful for us, and you know, hoping to bring that back as well as we look longer term. And I'll pass it to Mark to talk more about outreach.
All right, thank you.
The green one.
Outreach. So we touched all corners and community areas in the city of Chicago. I can't read the screen, so I won't try. And we were able to do that because equity was top of mind the entire time. As Nancy mentioned, we wanted to make sure that everyone felt included in the process. We wanted to make sure that all of the individuals in the city of Chicago knew that they could access this resource and at least put their name in the hat to see whether or not they could participate. The advisory council was critical in making sure that they helped spread the word and co-evangelize the work that we were trying to do among the city's most vulnerable communities. In addition to that, that advocacy that the advisory council did, we paid for outreach, which is something that we normally do not do at DFSS. We just anticipate that whatever it is that has been communicated is good enough. But when thinking about the vulnerable populations we want to serve, whether they be residents returning from incarceration, residents experiencing homelessness, residents that don't have access to Wi-Fi and technology, we wanted to make sure that there was a community-based organization that was trusted in their community, that could speak their language, that could give them in-person access to the application. We felt like that was critical to the success of this program. Also, we wanted to make sure that people who were not trusting of the government and the process, that they were also included. We did not, and we'll talk about this in a minute, we didn't reach all of the goals that we set out to accomplish, but we definitely had at least 5, 6 applications in every one of our community areas. Next aspect, let's go back. Application requirements were barrier and burden conscious.
Yep.
So we wanted to ensure the ease of the application. We were very conscious of how many documents were required to make sure that we could prove you were poor, prove that you were eligible for the program, prove that you lived in the city of Chicago. We wanted to minimize that as much as possible because, as we saw earlier, transforming human services was a critical aspect of the program. And one of the ways that we do that is by managing that part of the process. Didn't want to have to make people tell their story over and over again just to demonstrate that, yes, I am worthy. No, you are worthy. And we were actually as generous as we could possibly be as to that COVID impact. We didn't look for proof or documentation to support that. We took you at your word. And so those were critical aspects of this process. And we were successful. That was a win. Thanks to our technology partner, thanks to the wisdom of the people that have done this already, Give Directly, AKIT. They were able to get us an application that was easy to use. Most people got it done within about 27 minutes, and 78 of the people that started it completed it. So that was outstanding as far as we were concerned. And then again, the application results. Everyone in the city of Chicago knew about this program. We had a very big response on the very first day, but we wanted to make sure that we were getting as close as possible to the people that we felt really needed and deserved this opportunity. And so that's where those outreach partners were critical. They were doing day-to-day outreach, and we were also sure to make sure that each week we were looking at the data to make sure that we weren't missing people. One of the things that we wanted to do was have the City of Chicago be reflected in the application process, as well as in the applicant pool, as well as in the final outcomes. And so we think we accomplished that, but that wasn't possible without having these easy accessible application, having minimal application burden as we went through that process, having a mobile-first design. That was really, really critical for our DFSS HOP team, the Homeless Outreach Prevention team, that actually went to encampments, went to shelters to make sure that people knew about the program, to make sure that they had the ability to apply for this process. So all of those things working together allowed us to see those numbers that you can see, but I can't see on the screen.
The numbers look good.
Yeah. And so, again, we still didn't reach. We weren't, so the wins are there. We had 176,000 applications. Very easy to complete an application. But we still didn't reach all the goals that we wanted to. Looking at that data week to week, we recognized that we weren't getting as much representation from the Latinx community, from the Asian community. So we redirected our outreach teams to try and get more of that activity happening. And we're happy to say that we saw a huge surge in the last few days of the process. So whereas we wanted to be closer to 28%, we landed at 23. We got in trouble for that, but we were proud of the effort that we made, starting at 13, but then getting to that more significant number of making sure that the people that we wanted to apply for this program were able to participate and get the support that they needed over the long term. Over the year, I should say. And here we have a beautiful brother named Christopher. He is, of course, a native of Chicago, was born and raised in Auburn Gresham on the south side of Chicago. He is an artist, he is an entrepreneur, and he's also a survivor. Mm-hmm. You see he has glasses, and you might be able to see he has a cane. He was born being able to use his eyes. He was actually the victim of gun violence, but the resiliency of his story, his willingness to press forward and apply using the audio visual tools that were available, all of those things impacted his ability to access the application and put his name in the hat. He epitomizes the type of hope that we want to restore with programs like this. He epitomizes the resiliency that the people of this city and the people throughout the country actually have as far as being able to face adversity and bounce back over and over again. Whether there was a cash resiliency program or not, this guy was still going to be putting his best foot forward. But this gave him a little bit more room to breathe so that he could actually keep pursuing his goals and dreams. And even as you see in his quote, I work with a lot of people who are struggling, and this is from somebody that is struggling. But there's a beauty in that struggle that we face. People fighting to make a better life is something to admire. And so we admire Chris, we admire all the participants of this program, we admire the people that have the courage and the tenacity to try. And we appreciate being a part of the process where we can help people fulfill a few steps toward those dreams. Am I passed?
I don't think so.
Thank you, everyone. I actually forgot to tell you, Mark, part of being up here is completely forgetting how to read and doing it from the ground up. Well done, everyone. So with that being said, we'll move into a few questions from me to y'all, and hopefully we have time for a few audience questions as well. My first question is for Mark and Mara, and it's, how did you balance speed and efficiency with equity and care during the outreach process?
I'll start. Speed and efficiency, I think, has to be paramount. I know that we want to deliberate, we want to think through the process and be careful and get everything right the first time. But we also know that people are struggling. People need the resource right away. They've been needed it. And so keeping people like Christopher on the forefront of the work, and the reality is we don't do that in this process for the most part. But having that advisory team on board was critical in making sure that their challenges were represented. And so seeing how those inputs from that advisory group, as well as the pressure of making sure that we use this money efficiently and effectively, combined with having experts in the room to provide input on how this could possibly go. And here are some options that can make this be successful, is all important in making sure that you get the best possible outcomes. But again, we talk about pilot, and we definitely want to recognize that it's a new thing. But also with a pilot, you want to make sure that you're using the best information that you have available. You don't want to you're not starting from scratch. This is the 21st conference that we've had. So there's expertise all over the room, all over the country. And so by using the research and the work that's already been done, along with working with people that care about the people that you want to serve, as well as having experts and technicians that know how to do this stuff, having those pieces together are critical in order to make sure that you capitalize on speed and efficiency while also including equity in that process.
Can we clap for that? Yeah, there's something there. Something I've also heard both of you describe, which I think is so critical for this work, is all of the partnerships that you had in place and all of the effort that it took to make sure that the partnerships were in place, that there was trust, that there was goodwill across departments, right? Also, I think allowed for some of the speed, the impressive speed that you achieved. I think not a parallel, but like I said, our program is not situated within an agency, right? So we're really, I didn't have an email address, right, when I first accepted the job, and I had to figure out how to do a bunch of things, and how lucky to work with tremendous people like Naja and Jamie and Isaiah and Kevin, everybody, and we figured it out, and this gorgeous community who I would call people like Sarah Moran, call Nancy, how did you do this? Can you talk, do you have 5 minutes right now, actually, because I have to figure this out. So thank you. As far as outreach is concerned, I think the way we were able to balance that, speed as well as ensuring equity and care were centered is relying and having faith in artists, right? The outreach corps that we worked with did tremendous work. And the tremendous work we had, not everybody wanted to work with us, I'll just say. We're a huge program statewide, right? There isn't necessarily a parallel art service organization in every single county or every single district. There are many, many, many arts organizations who do the really important community work that's about healing, that's about recovering, that's about change. And we worked with them in every way that we could, and there wasn't necessarily like a parallel municipal agency or department that could support us in getting the word out. So we relied on artists, and they did the work. So that's one thing. I'd also just say, as a comment on speed, I think in our case, artists are both, right, experiencing the safety net and in terms of applying to various onerous things, right, in municipalities. And then on top of that, they're applying to grants. That is a whole other, all foundations have a different process, right? And the entire process is about proving your deservingness. And so we wanted to make sure that our process was antithetical to that. And so that being said, we had to prove that we were about it, right? And not everybody trusted us to begin with. When we said, no, I really promise, it really is just those 10 questions. People were like, are you sure? and because of that, we also have gorgeous representation testimony from folks because they wanted to share more. They're like, wait, let me tell you more about my artistic practice and this and that. So yeah, I guess the nut for me is we trusted artists to be able to support us in our outreach because they held the values that we did as well.
If I could just add just one more angle to this, just we've spoken about minimizing that administrative burden and about the care and trust that shows to our participants, our residents. And I just also want to name that lowering that administrative burden is also taking care of our workers. Because when I think about the things that DFSS staff, for example, the hoops they had to jump through to apply, other federal funding, pandemic-related assistance for our rental assistance programs, that paperwork burden, the multiple loops you have to go through, that's fatiguing also for the staff who are trying to get, this great resource into our residents' hands. And so, I really feel strongly that trying to find ways to ease those administrative burdens helps all of us, right? It helps the workers and it helps ultimately the recipients.
Thank you. I'm going to skip to the meaty question in the interest of time. This is for everyone. If you had the funding to turn this into a permanent program, what would you keep and what would you change? Glad I don't have to answer
Let
it.
me go first.
Great.
Someone else has to go first.
I was like, should we hear from
I gotta think
Sarah?
one
What
more
do you
minute.
advocate for?
I have two things that aren't the only things, but they're the things that come to mind right now. I think a startling and true statistic that we uncovered in our application process and with all of the 20,000 folks is that over 65% of the artists who applied had zero familiarity with GI or UBI or GBI. That's huge. And so while we made efforts to spread the word and say everything we knew about what this program was, if this were to become, if there was a permanent version of Creators Rebuild New York, of our Guaranteed Income for Artists program, political education would be part and parcel of everything we did from the beginning and throughout and always and always. We're doing a lot of that now, but if we could have baked that in more strongly, and I think we needed a little more time to do that. That's where the speed thing to me gets tricky, right? Or slippery maybe is the better word. And then the other thing I think about, which maybe I'll take back after this is recorded, but I think the scale of the geography I have questions about. I think we need to do more, bigger, everybody. We need to get to everybody.
Yeah.
And as you all also deeply felt, the relationships that need to be in place to do something like this exist on a local scale. So I have questions about a regional approach or a city approach, a county approach, rather than what we did, which was a statewide approach.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay.
Thank
there
you,
we go.
Mara.
I tried.
Wonderful.
I tried, Sarah.
There's so many things I would keep. I think the principle of getting unconditional cash into people's hands is so fundamental, right? And I think that is what pulls everyone in this room together. I don't think that's in dispute. I think we think a lot about what's the right amount for the right people at the right time. And I think that's what we're going to learn from this pilot. It's a broad-based pilot on purpose. The research that's going to come out of it is going to help us. We talk about targeting, and I know there was a session earlier I missed on targeting versus universality. Well, there's targeting demographically, and there's targeting by poverty, and there's just time targeting. So when is the right time to get cash into people's hands in their lifespan? And I'd love to learn a little bit more about that. Resources are finite. And so it could be that there are going to be specific arcs and points in time in people's lives when an injection of cash is going to have a particular return, and that's something I'd love to explore more. There's still equity within that. You're not actually targeting at a specific group of people, but you're thinking a little bit more about when is the right time to invest in people, when is going to make the most time. So that's something I like to think about, and I think for the next project, thinking about how to target that way.
For me, I would want to eliminate the income restrictions, or at least raise them higher. I think there's a lot of,
Hear, hear.
I think there's a lot of confusion and misconception about what that looks like for different people at different times and stages in their life. So, Zenaida, is that how you say her name?
Zenaida.
No.
Oh, Zenaida.
Zenaida, yes. She would have missed most of our programs, but she needs it. Some would say more than others. And so just thinking through and differently about how we manage those income thresholds, I think is critical in order to ensure the success of this type of service and program and to expand the possibilities of the program.
Just riffing on what you were saying, I think something I would certainly keep is that very consultative process that we used, in community, in partnership with community organizations. I think I would love to do more directly with residents next time around. We included a few folks with lived experience in our group, but it can also be daunting to speak up in a group Zoom call with 37 people, and a lot of them are very senior and serious and sound very educated and are using big words and
have
lingo
strong
that you may or may not be
opinions
exposed to. And so I think that's something I'd want to think about. And then riffing on what Mark was saying for income, I know when we did our next cash assistance program, which was one time, we were like, hey, remember how we were a little scared to use broader residency as proxy for income? What if we do that now? And we did get that through, and that was essentially the idea of using, if your address, which, you showed us your ID, or a bill, you showed us you lived there, was in a qualified census tract, so to speak, like a high poverty census tract, then you don't have to prove your income to us. And so I think I'd love to keep pushing on those approaches, again, reducing how much proof somebody has to bring to us and reducing the amount of paperwork that they have to bring to us to qualify.
Great.
Thank you. I think we have just enough time to take one question from the audience. Don't be shy.
Where's the happy hour?
Sure?
Yes, please.
Please. Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, I have one question for Creative Reveal New York. So I am a nonprofit cultural worker. I'm also an immigrant, and I'm also an artist. So I've been living in the U.S. for the past 5 years, and I've seen how the nonprofit industrial complex works and the ties to philanthropy, and how philanthropy itself creates sometimes an unequal system. So since your program was primarily funded by private philanthropy, I just want to ask and to learn a little bit more about the process of working with private philanthropy. Like, how did that look like? Did you have to negotiate any kind of whatever? I don't know. And also I know private philanthropy is kind of vague. I don't know exactly what you talk about when you refer to private philanthropy, but if you could tell us a little bit more about that, that would be great. Thank you.
I'm happy to, and I think what I heard, thank you for sharing a bit of your story as an artist, cultural worker, immigrant, and shared the nonprofit industrial complex. Ooh, I've been working, I know exactly what you're talking about. Well, I'll find you later so we can get into the details. And then also about, I think the question was, how did this come into being, and what is this private philanthropy, what are they trying to do? I didn't share too much of this, but I can say a little bit of the genesis story of CRNY is that at the time in 2021, then Governor Cuomo, New York Governor Cuomo, put together a commission to think about how do we rebuild New York State. That was the phrase that was used at the time, and they had a bunch of people at the table to say the economy needs, the pandemic has been trash and a half. We got to do something. We got to put some money to people. How are we going to do it? Elizabeth Alexander, who's a wonderful poet, as many of you probably know, and also is the president of the Mellon Foundation, was at that table and chimed up to say artists need to be a part of this plan. Did the state do anything for artists? No. So philanthropy said, let's try to do something. And when I say philanthropy, in this case, I mean specifically the Andrew Mellon Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. So Creators Rebuild New York did not exist, and that's what I mean by I didn't have an email address. Those funders came together and said, let's try to do something really big, and let's find, and let's create an entity to move that cash through and have them figure it out. So we are the them. We are the them that philanthropy hired to figure out how to do it. I think that philanthropy's role in the basic income movement can be many things, and I think this group of people, this community, should be shining a light saying, philanthropy, this is what we need from you. Yeah. Otherwise, philanthropy will go in rooms and decide for us how they'll push the money to this movement. Yeah. And so if we need funding for field building, if we need to be convening more, if we need to have conversations, if we need if we need more money so that people can go do some lobbying work around work limits, et cetera, we need to tell philanthropy that that's what we need. And how lucky are we that we get to be, I feel very privileged that I get to be working on behalf of so many artists with such a significant initial investment. $125 million is nothing to sneeze at, of course, and for a statewide initiative like ours. So hopefully that answered a little bit of yours, and let's talk. Yeah.
I got the signal that we have to wrap it up. So to do so, I'm going to ask each of you to share a closing thought, phrase, quote, however you want to end us.
I'll start. We'll go down that way. I'm just beyond grateful to be in Chicago 7 days after we issued final payments to a huge number of Chicagoans who were, I'm grateful to them for putting their faith in us in doing this project. I would think we were crazy too if I'd gotten that text a year ago saying, the city of Chicago would like to give you $500 a month for 12 months. So yeah, just hugely grateful to the partnership and for the city of Chicago's leadership in that.
You all inspired me, so I have a few bars. This is hard, and this ain't rocket science. It is incredibly harder. This is groundbreaking, earth moving, and a movement. This is paradigm shifting is infinitely harder than orbiting the earth, harder than, I wish I could read my writing, harder than sending satellites to Mars, harder than sending satellites to Mars and colonizing what's left of the known world. Remember, this is revolution, and it can be done. It must be done, and it will be done on planet Earth, even better than it is in heaven.
Yes, Mark.
EP dropping this summer.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
Oh gosh, I have to go after. I think the last just encouragement I want to leave folks with, and I want to remind myself of too, right? And I'm so grateful we got to hear from some pilot participants throughout the past 2 days, is just to, when you're wading through the requirements and your to-do lists and managing all these people and trying to meet deadlines, I think one thing to just always reground and help wade through all that is just to think about how you want people to feel as they interact with what you're designing. So I know that came up for us a lot, and it's easy when you're rushing to just kind of okay, check it off, we achieved the task, but just taking that one extra moment to think how would, if I was receiving this message, after I applied 3 weeks ago to something. Like, does this make sense? Is this exciting? Just like always coming back to how do you want people to feel at every single step? What's that? And for us, we really wanted to keep trying to cultivate that sense of like trust, empowerment, care. And so I think that really helped to guide us, and it's something I really hope that we can all carry forward.
I love that. I'm thinking a lot of things. I would say, I said this a bit before, so I'll just repeat it in a different way. Artists are in your programs. Artists are in all of these programs. Artists are caregivers, they're neighbors, they're parents, they're struggling. There are Grammy Award-winning singers in the Bronx who are living well below the poverty level, and that's really not okay. We need to cherish these culture makers and culture keepers. Artists are essential. They're not just an embellishment. And I hope we can make sure they're included in all of the policy work that we carry forward with this community.
Yay.
Awesome. That's it.
That's it. Thanks,
All right.
everyone. It's been
Thank
great.
you, Nasha.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nadja.
Clap for them. Clap for yourselves.
That was awesome.
Yay! Oh,
You're gonna write that up and send that
Who's
around.
making?
Hey everyone, we just have about 10 minutes of closing remarks in this room. Everybody's from the other sessions are about to join us. Grab